Good morning, grade sevens. This is Mrs. Nickel, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a lesson on gas exchange and transpiration and talking about stoma in plants, just in case you don't understand it fully from the notes that you read. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try to share my screen with you, and we're going to go over some slides that we have that talk about leaves and stomata, and hopefully make this a little bit more clear for you. So first of all, on the underside of the leaves, there are these openings called, if there's one opening, it's called a stomata. So just one single one here would be called a stomata, but all of them together, or more than one of them, would be called a stoma. So you'll sometimes hear those terms used interchangeably. So sometimes we'll use the word stomata, sometimes we'll use stoma. It just is a matter of whether we're talking about one of them or whether we're talking about lots of them. So it means the same thing if you hear either one of those words. So if you were to look underneath the surface of a leaf and you were to use a microscope, it's not usually visible to the naked eye, but if you have a little bit of a magnifying glass or a microscope, you can actually see these openings on the bottom of a leaf. And so the reason we need to talk about this is because we need to make sure you understand how are carbon dioxide and oxygen, those gases, going to get into and out of the plant. Now just remember for Science 7 too, we're not going to go into great detail about how this happens. When you get further on into Science 10 here in Alberta, you'll go into more depth and you'll study this in a lot more detail, but we just need to give you kind of the overview of how this works for grade 7. So on the bottom of the leaves, typically, there are tiny holes or pores that we call stomata. And on the next slide, we're actually going to look a little bit more closely at what a stomata actually looks like. And so these holes, they literally are holes, are able to open or close depending on the circumstances. So this is where gas exchange happens through the process of diffusion. And diffusion always means that something goes from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So if inside the leaves photosynthesis is happening, that means it's producing lots and lots and lots of lots and lots of oxygen inside the leaf, because it's using carbon dioxide. And so because it's using lots and lots of carbon dioxide, it's producing lots and lots of oxygen, you end up with more oxygen inside the leaf compared to the atmosphere outside. So what happens is the oxygen from inside the leaf starts moving towards the outside through these stoma. And it's just the process of diffusion. So moving from where there's lots of oxygen, those oxygen molecules are spreading out and moving to a place where there is lower oxygen, which happens to be outside in the atmosphere. Now, the opposite happens with carbon dioxide. So there's not a huge amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but in the plant cells, when they start doing photosynthesis, they start using up all of the carbon dioxide. So then it becomes a very, very low concentration. There's not very much carbon dioxide inside the leaves because the plant is using it for photosynthesis. And so because of that, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere starts getting pulled in through the stoma in the leaves. So it starts getting brought into the leaves because there's a lower concentration compared to outside in the atmosphere, and the carbon dioxide moves in so that it can get used up in the process of photosynthesis. So gas exchange happens, and it's always because of this moving from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, and we call that process diffusion. So water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen will be entering and exiting the cells in these leaves through these openings. So water is going to be released out. We'll talk about that in a minute. Oxygen is going to be released out, okay, but carbon dioxide is going to be pulled in because it's being used up in the plant for photosynthesis, and there is a lack of it, so it needs more, whereas oxygen is going to be being produced, and there's more of it in the plant than the atmosphere, so it moves out of the plant cell. And what's happening with water is that it is actually moving up to the leaves to provide water for the process of photosynthesis, but it also is getting kind of, as it has sunlight hit it, it will turn into a water vapor, and some of that comes out through the leaves, and we call that process transpiration. Now, why are stomata on the underside of the leaf? Why not on the top part? And there's two main reasons for that. The first one is that we want to prevent excess water loss. So if the stoma, if the openings were on the top side of the leaf, then it's kind of like being in the sun and being in the shade. So you guys know that it's a lot hotter if you're standing in the sun compared to standing underneath a tree, right, when you're in the shade. So the top part of the leaf that has lots and lots of sun exposure gets much, much hotter. And so if the openings were on the top of the leaf, more water would be evaporated through those openings. However, because the stoma are on the underside of the leaf, they're kind of shaded, like being underneath an umbrella. So even though there is transpiration that happens, it's a lot less than if those openings were on the top of the leaf. Okay. The next thing is that they might actually get shut. So we're going to take a look on this next page here about how stoma actually works. And so stomata or stoma can be open or closed by changing the shape of their guard cells, and it has to do with how much water is around. So when water comes into the guard cells, it actually swells them up and causes the guard cells to open. So it's like when you have something really skinny and you start to swell it, it pushes each other open. And so if there's not enough water, if too much of it is transpiring, those guard cells stay shut. And so then there won't be any gas exchange at all, which happens during some times of the day as well. So when the guard cells absorb water, they swell up, they open the stoma, and that allows carbon dioxide to come in through diffusion. It allows water vapor and oxygen to diffuse out. And as long as the stomata is open, transpiration and gas exchange will occur. However, at nighttime, there's a little bit of a different processes happening. So first of all, at nighttime, there's no photosynthesis. And so because of that, the plant isn't using carbon dioxide. It's not producing oxygen that needs to be released. And so it doesn't actually need to exchange any gases. So at nighttime, typically the stomata will close and they will just stay closed until the morning when photosynthesis starts again. And it also shuts down transpiration, so it kind of holds in and keeps in that water overnight. And so anyways, this is just so that you understand, without going into too much detail, that there is a difference between the daytime and the nighttime, and most plant cells have their stomata open during the day and they have them closed at night. Okay, so just a quick look here at transpiration. So we've flipped the leaf over, so we're looking at the underside of the leaf. Now when water vapor comes out of those stoma, we call that process transpiration. Okay, so that is the loss of water through evaporation, but we give it a specific name and we call it transpiration. So the water is in a vapor form. It's actually changed from liquid, where it gets absorbed through the roots and moved up through the tree, through the xylem, all the way to the leaves. But then when it gets enough energy, it turns into a gas form, and then it's released through the stomata into the atmosphere. And transpiration is actually a really important part of the water cycle, and it contributes to quite a bit of water that is evaporated up into the air that comes from land. Okay, so most evaporation in the water cycle, of course, comes from oceans because they cover so much of land surface. But from the land, transpiration is a really, really important source of water that goes up into the atmosphere as part of the water cycle. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of information about transpiration, about gas exchange, about how stomata work, just in case when you were looking at your notes or watching the other videos, it wasn't clear. So good luck, and make sure you email me if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.